And I think in the area of AI, it's very hard to oftentimes kind of get to what the real deal is. Because you hear all the things about why it's great, and you hear lots of very, very maybe quite extreme narratives, but what's really happening, it's very hard to find out. And in my experience in technology, I think this is one of the first times where the human side of things and culture is really front and center of our discussion.
Thinking about AI, what's different here versus what's developing in Silicon Valley?
Another emerging trend starting this year is something called embodied AI. And this is AI coming into the real world. And it's interesting because it taps into what I mean by a leapfrog.
Welcome to the 𝐏𝐸𝐲𝐢𝐴 MBA Superconnector podcast. This episode's guest is Dan Wan. Dan's career has taken him from Silicon Valley to Hong Kong, to Beijing, to Hangzhou, to Shanghai, to Malaysia, and back to Hong Kong. He's been both a corporate leader with some of the largest companies in the world and also a serial entrepreneur. Dan teaches MBA courses at 𝐏𝐸𝐲𝐢𝐴 in the areas of artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and entrepreneurship. In today's episode, Dan and I talk about the challenges businesses are facing as they apply artificial intelligence and the differences he sees between AI strategies in China and the US. Dan also shares about the big questions each of his courses tackle. We also hear about how Dan first got into AI before we all heard about ChatGPT and what his career journey has been. And at the end of this podcast, a favorite part for me, Dan tells us what he thinks about his time living in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong. Is one the best? How are the cities different? I really enjoyed his answer. Thanks for connecting with us today.
Hi, Dan. Great to have you on our podcast today. And I'm looking forward to talking more about your insights in artificial intelligence and innovation around Asia. You have a fascinating background. You're like an explorer. You're someone that has led digital transformations with Nokia, Samsung, MTR. You've led multiple startups in Silicon Valley, Hangzhou, and Malaysia. You're an investor. You're a teacher, facilitating or leading a council at the conference board. You're a public speaker. Tell me, how did you get started on this journey? And what's led to you doing what you do today?
Thanks, Steve, for having me on this podcast. This was not the original plan. When I started out, and this is going to college and planning my early career, in my mind, like many, many people, it was like a straight line path. I would, kind of go to the right, learn the right stuff, get a good job at a big company, and kind of go through that path. And I never thought I would work in Asia. Never thought I'd be in Asia. I never thought I'd be at like 6 startups now. Never thought. And so definitely the path that has happened was not the original path I had planned. And I think maybe if I had to pick one spot that made a change, I would say is actually going to school and working in Silicon Valley. And I think just being in that environment, right? You're in an environment where folks are always talking about the next thing. You're seeing disruptive changes. And it kind of opened my eyes to trying different things that may not be on that path I planned. And I think that's kind of what opened my mind to be able to try some different things that may not necessarily be on the original path.
And how did you make that decision to start to work in China?
It was not necessarily a conscious choice. I think there's one thing, I do tend to be a curious person. And I just like trying new experiences. And, coming to China was actually meant to be, I think for many people, like a 2-year stint. I was working in the Silicon Valley company back then. And this was a company that was doing like a new technology that allowed the mobile phone to go on the internet. That was new back then. And so this was the pioneering company in Silicon Valley that did this. It was called software.com, phone.com, combined, called OpenWave. And back in those days, there were a lot of customers that were all around the world. In Europe, Asia was growing very, very quickly. So I had a chance to do like a 2-year stint. So they said, Dan, would you like to try 2 years in Hong Kong? And, you look Asian, you speak some Cantonese, maybe you can go back. And so I thought, well, that would be so fun, right? 2 years is a short time, like when you're in Silicon Valley, you're managing the global market, it's good to get some international experience. So that's how it started, just like that. I would go do 2 years in Hong Kong, Asia Pacific headquarters, go back to Silicon Valley and continue on my original path by kind of getting some additional experience. So that was kind of how that happened. And, lots of things you can't plan. I came to Hong Kong for those 2 years. I loved it. It's just the energy here. You're always learning and seeing different things. So after 2 years in Hong Kong, flying around Asia Pacific, I thought, all my stuff is in storage. My car's in storage. I was a bit of a pain. And, why don't I just spend 2 more years, right? Again, another 2 more years, and then I'll pop back to Signal Valley and get back on my path, right? And now then I'll have 4 years of very legitimate international experience. So then I thought, like Hong Kong, it's great because you go to all of Asia. But, each place very different, very shallowly. So I thought maybe I need to pick one place, go a bit deeper 2 years, and then go back. And then I thought, maybe if I were to choose, maybe mainland China. So actually, that was the next path. So I then moved to China, to Beijing, actually, during SARS. This is 2003. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a shocker, right? But I moved there, family, with the idea that I stay there for 2 years.
So that got you to China. Now you're doing a lot of work at the cutting edge of AI, different areas. I know you're working with lots of different companies on this topic. How did you first get involved in AI? Steve Jobs talks about you can't connect the dots going forward, but if you look backwards, you can connect the dots. For you, what dots connected for AI?
I think that's so true. And Steve, you know this. I spent most of my career competing with Apple. And so I think Apple, especially in the era of Steve Jobs, was a very different company. And so a lot of the things that they do, he really is an original thinker. And I do also remember that speech, and I think it's very relevant to what happened to me, because I think, looking back, right, my original idea was, okay, I'm going to have a path. There's some dots on the path, and I'll connect it like in a very linear, straight way. And what's happened since is lots of the dots I found out, that may not be along that path. If you choose it, it connects to something else. And so actually kind of it's starting to connect. Yeah, I was a dot that was not on the path because, I got involved back in 2013, 2014. It was right when AI was not mainstream. And in fact, back then the question was, well, does it even work? And I had an opportunity, and at that point, I was working for a very traditional, a large company called Samsung that was also doing a little bit of AI, but just on the side. And so I had a chance to run an AI company and go to Hangzhou, China to do that. And I think if you analyze it logically, right, and you kind of do a cost-benefit analysis and outcome, that may not necessarily be the right path. But I just felt that, and there was no evidence at that point to say that this is a viable path. I just felt that, number one, it's just so interesting as a thing to learn, right? And even then, you see some early signs that maybe something's changing. So I really just jumped up. And I thought, you know what, here's like a dot that's, off the path. If it doesn't work out, I'll learn, I'll come back in. I'll come back to the original dot. And that dot became the path, because it was right during that time that AI went from like non-mainstream to like starting to become viable. Now we're kind of at the opposite side of that, which is the opposite side of the stream. Oh, now AI can do everything. But that's how I guess it was not meant to be. It was not clear that this will be the path. So it started in Hangzhou, actually. And even in Hangzhou, it's not a tier one city. It's always known for Alibaba.
Yeah.
But 2014, 2013, Hangzhou, okay, interesting. And now you look back and, like Hangzhou is like, you would argue it's at one of the centers of AI development globally. People outside of this region have heard of DeepSeek and Manus, but that's just a tip of the iceberg. There's so much happening there. And so it's just so interesting to see that happen.
Yeah. So now one of the things you're doing is you run a AI council with the conference board. And I'm curious, as you talk with these businesses, what are the AI topics that they're thinking about? What are the opportunities that you're discussing with them? What are the challenges? Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, the conference board is a very interesting organization. They were actually founded in 1916. So they're a think tank that's over 100 years old. It's, headquartered in New York, but they're everywhere. They're in the region. Singapore's a center. There's a Beijing center. And there are all these different councils. And there's like, CMO council, CFO council. I run the AI council for Asia. And so in my council, we have members from different industries across the geography. And, normally we try to keep it small and intimate. It's closed doors, invitation only, and it's chat house rules. And so everybody shares freely what's happening. And I think in the area of AI, it's very hard to oftentimes kind of get to what the real deal is. because you hear all the things about why it's great, and you hear lots of very, very maybe quite extreme narratives, but what's really happening, it's very hard to find out. And so I think kind of this is the forum. And in the forum, and it's shifting so quickly, there are a couple things that are very top of mind, right? One thing that's very top of mind is to the practitioners, and these are all the chief AI officers, CDOs, right, in different organizations, from like agriculture to telecommunications to financial services to like engineering, right? And it covers all these. One of the big topics that we discuss is just how to apply that, where to apply this in an area that really brings business impact. And it's interesting because AI is what we call a general purpose technology. So you basically can apply it to everything. So a lot of our members are kind of also at a loss. You can apply it everywhere, but where is the place? And so there's not a lot there's not a lot there you can go by, and each industry is very different. So kind of that's one thing that's top of mind, where to apply that. The second thing that's especially relevant in this environment is how do I encourage adoption of AI across the organization? And that's always a challenge for technology. But I think in our current environment, it's particularly challenging because there's a lot of cost pressure, frankly speaking, on companies, just kind of dealing with survival. And in this environment, I think what makes AI particularly tricky when it comes to adoption is, well, part of the use of AI is really cost reduction. And that cost reduction very often then actually becomes workforce reduction. This is the thing that shows up immediately in your P&L. And so, there's a lot of scenarios whereby, using AI also leads to workforce reduction. So it's quite a challenge in terms of then deploying. So we spent a lot of time talking about really the human side of AI. And in my experience in technology, I think this is one of the first times where the human side of things and culture is really front and center of our discussion. Actually, one of my council members is from the HR department because kind of deploying the technology, lots of the challenges are around how do you upskill, how do you retrain, how do you build a culture? And it's all the things, frankly speaking, that, us as leaders, we always know about. But frankly speaking, it's often been overlooked, to be honest. Kind of in my career in different places, I always have a training budget. And always at the end of the year, I get reminded, hey, please use your training budget. And it's just kind of afterthought. But now in the case of AI, it's come back front and center because it's so important. There's so many, technology pilots where the technology works, but it doesn't deploy. And this all goes back to the human factor. And, you're starting to see a trend in the industry whereby you have this combination of, let's say, quote unquote, IT and HR together. There's within the conference board, the council, there is one of our members, so financial services is one of the exchanges, to be honest, without being specific, it's one of the exchanges. And they are putting together a council that includes lots of technology people along with HR people to address this. There's some public cases, and this is not, kind of mainstream, but, like Moderna. Moderna have their IT head reports to the CHRO, and is trying, and I think this is a very particular case because the CHRO does have some technology background, right? So I'm not sure it's a mainstream thing, but in my discussions more and more, really this part is coming front and center about how to do this. Some of my ex-colleagues in one of the companies, and some of the companies I work with, the CIO in the past never does training. I mean, they don't work that closely with their HR business partners, and in several cases now, they're doing training. And it's not just prompt engineering anymore. It's deeper training to do this. So that's the second part. I think the final thing that makes the conference more interesting in my discussions there is AI is by nature cross-functional, cross-domain. And if you look at where lots of councils are organized, right? Like our CFO council, if you look at the conference board, all of our councils are actually a mirror of the org structure. It's very, very vertical, like functional areas, right? And typically our councils run in, it's very, very vertical, right? AI is different. I'm always doing events with different councils. I've spoken at most of the councils because everybody's thinking about AI. And so I think that last part is really AI is by definition very cross-functional. That relates to some of the earlier points. So lots of interesting developments. Yeah, the conference board is quite interesting to be able to get that insider view.
And that connection between HR and IT is fascinating. How much of this is related to the idea of agents for AI? And I've, hearing people talk about you need an HR team to manage these agents, or how is that played into?
Things are shifting quickly. And of course, I think the adoption and use of technology in general and AI is very, very different from different industries and companies. I often see there are three buckets, right? They're one bucket is the AI believers, and they're going straight in. Some are on the other extreme, some are the AI disbelievers, to be honest. And there are a lot in between. And even in the same industry, I see these three. And I think I think that's a baseline. Some of the companies that are more at the forefront are already having quote unquote digital workers. Okay. And so kind of in the workflow, they'll have managers who have to manage these digital workers. What does that really mean? Well, the same task, you can now as a manager, you need to decide, do you give this task to a human or do you give that task to an AI agent? And now you start needing to have both skills of management, managing humans and managing AI. Agentic AI in particular is quite a new trend this year. There's lots of things about it that make it more difficult than, let's say, generative AI, in the sense that even within like inside an enterprise, it requires tighter coordination, both at the technical side and organizational side between different departments, because the workflow goes across different departments. And I think that's quite difficult. Even when you have the technical foundation, you have the CRMs and ERPs, right? But they're still quite difficult. But already some are already using this to different degrees. Some are already thinking and exploring the concept of digital workers. And there is a shift to move some of these workloads into agentic AI. The capabilities are getting stronger and stronger, but that's clearly the trend that started this year for many organizations. Still lots of trial and error. I think it's still not as broadly adopted as generative AI, but kind of going to that next path. And I think there's some interesting research that's coming out as well about how do you draw the balance when you're starting to think about giving a workload to human or AI, the balance. On the one hand, you're trying to automate, right? Lots of activities can be straight on 100% AI, but then also how do you augment? How do you kind of combine two to do something that wasn't possible before? And so there's some new research that's just coming even mid this year, right, around the human agency scale. And how do you actually start quantifying this? I think that's been part of the challenge. Is lots of these things are well known, but how do you quantify that in a way that you can actually make a business decision on how you use your resources? Let's say you're the CFO and you're looking across these workflows. How do you make that decision? And so this human agency study that came out now at least starts giving you a classification system. You can start then mapping things, and then you might discover, you know what, all of the companies or enterprises initiatives are all just automation. Maybe you want to just think about some of these other areas, right? And that particular study has 5 categories, right? So there's lots of new thinking that's happening, but we're in the early days yet.
How about you're working with business leaders here in Asia, and I've heard you give some interesting talks on innovation East and West. Thinking about AI, what's different here versus what's developing in Silicon Valley? How do you see, similarities, differences? What should we
Yeah.
expect?
I think there are 2 very different paths of development in the path of AI. And I think, it's really AI East and West. And by East and West, we're talking about like the West mainly represented by, let's say, US to developments, East mainly represented by China and their developments there. And, kind of in my time there, I noticed that just generally, I mean, the way they innovate is completely different. And that's kind of the course you're talking about, innovation East and West, right? Kind of using different systems. AI is developing in a very, very different way along multiple segments, right? One area is, I think, the infrastructure is changing. One of the commonly cited areas is this struggle between open and closed source. And if you kind of taking a look at how things are developing, things in the West are much more closed source. In other words, the models are proprietary. They don't share open weights, and so you can't actually use it yourself and deploy. And so the mainstream of East is proprietary. It's becoming clear that the mainstream in the East is becoming open source. And there are many, many reasons for that. And so now you have just the infrastructure approach is quite different. And it remains to be seen how this moves forward, right? But I think one thing that we're seeing already is this whole tech stack is shifting in terms of the approach. For a period of time, it was in terms of model performance, it's always the proprietary models always beat the open ones. Now you're seeing parity, and in some cases, open source kind of exceeding. But I think basically it's at parity, which means that if we look back at history and we look at, for example, the story of Linux, we can kind of see again how is this developing. So kind of on that level, I think that we need to pay attention. And already many practitioners, especially in this part of the world, are already using multi-stack. They're using Western tech stack for AI and Eastern tech stack. So there's one piece. And number 2, because the approach is so different, I think there are many implications. One is, the cost structure is different. I mean, when you have abundance and no constraints, you go one path. But then you very often hear that constraint brings innovation. One constraint in today's geopolitics is semiconductors. And, if you're in China, you actually can't get the top performing semiconductors, and forces you from day one to use less compute. And so that's one reason when DeepSeek first came out, it was, I think, a 30th of the cost.
Yep.
And I think this is persistent. And so I think structurally, kind of the models coming up east and west, a bit more open weights. An enterprise, you're more likely to adopt that to control your own destiny. The cost structure, just as an enterprise, you must consider that, right? And then I think the third playbook in China that's so interesting that you see this playbook again and again is called the leapfrog. And this is when different waves and phases of technology come to the fore. And we've lived this movie before. When I first moved to China, I was in telecommunications. And in those days, fixed line telecommunications did not exist in China. And mobile was just emerging elsewhere. So China went straight to mobile. And so a lot of what happened after was mobile first, just because they had to. This hasn't happened yet, but I would expect in the East and West, the bottom technology will shift. If you look at these past 10 years of development, it's basically one playbook. It's basically large, gigantic neural networks, mega data centers now requiring energy using things like nuclear power, right? So that's the playbook. I think the new playbook going forward, if you take a longer term view, I think it's going to be a whole different set of infrastructures. I think the chips are going to be different. Tapping into the earlier thing, okay, now I think I wouldn't be surprised if China now starts focusing, silicon is so last century. Let's think quantum chips. Yeah. And now they start developing a whole new stack on quantum chips. I don't think that's necessarily happening very mainstream right now, but it's basically the leapfrog. There are all these new technologies that are now expanding in terms of, what's possible. Another emerging trend starting this year is something called embodied AI. And this is AI coming into the real world. And it's interesting because it taps into what I mean by a leapfrog. And if you believe that the current phase of AI development is really that same scale law, it's the same approach, right? Done in different ways. But then now there's new thinking coming in. And even in the West, we're seeing something called embodied AI, right? AI coming to the real world. The narrative is, look, AI has reached this level of incredible performance, but it's reached this level just via text and media. So all the things that you see, that's all a machine knows about the world. But the world knowledge is much more than that. It's walking in the world. It's tripping. It's understanding the real world. And so the next phase is now bringing AI into and understanding the real world, which would then, some people say, lead AI to come to the next frontier of intelligence, maybe super intelligence. And, to some people, lots of times things in AI sound very far-fetched, right? But let me give you 3 data points in terms of to consider this happening. There's somebody called the godmother of AI. This is Professor Li Feifei of Stanford. Right. So you can go back and say this wave of machine learning development is because of her. Because of something called ImageNet.
Yep.
And she open sourced this ImageNet database. Yeah. That's why we're here where we are today.
These are like the pictures of like the blueberry muffins that look like Chihuahua dogs and stuff like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you know what she has just done last year? She formed a new company called World Labs. And World Labs is exactly that. It's trying to take all the sensors in the real world and use that as a training data now for AI. So now AI is not just cognizant of digital data and media, it knows the real world. So that's kind of one data point. This is the godmother of AI. Second data point is the godfather, one of the 4 godfathers of AI, very well-known person, Yann LeCun. Yann LeCun has been with Meta for over 10 years. I think it was it last month? I think actually a couple of days ago.
He's leaving end of this year.
He's leaving. There's been lots of rumors, but he has now announced and confirmed that he is leaving Meta to start his own startup. What is his startup about? It's exactly this. It's kind of taking the next leap. Oh. Yann LeCun has always been vocal about the fact that he doesn't believe that this current large language model is the path to general intelligence or superintelligence. It needs to be something that combines real world knowledge, new algorithms. And so now he is heading in that direction. Right. So Yann LeCun is doing that. Third data point, Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, and again, maybe just a couple of days ago, Jeff Bezos have announced that he is taking his first operational role since leaving Amazon a couple of years ago to do what? There's something called Project Prometheus. What is Project Prometheus? It is AI for the physical economy. That's what that is. And so we're seeing this movement move over quickly. And what I want to say in terms of like AI East and West, right? And these examples are, let's say, Western examples. So even the West is coming, but look at what's happening in China. Lots of this embodied AI is about real world sensors. In other words, coming from robotics, like cars, self-driving cars, right? The amount of self-driving cars across China. Yeah. And also robotics. And if you take a look at China, lots of the activity in robotics is actually feeding into this physical world AI. Yeah. And so as it relates to robotics, so robotics is not just robotics, and there's lots of use of robotics, but as it relates to AI kind of moving to the next phase of intelligence, and if you believe that the physical world is an important part, then if you take a look at China, lots of the physical embodiment of this intelligence, whether it's robotics or drones or even self-driving cars, right, kind of is tapping into China's big market. So a next leap could be happening there.
Fascinating. I imagine you cover some of this in the courses you teach here. We're grateful that you teach at our MBA program. And you teach 3 courses right now, one on AI, innovation, and product management, another on digital transformation in the exponential age, and a new one coming up on the 10x entrepreneur, using AI to amplify impact. When I think about courses, I always try to have in my mind a big question that the course is trying to explore. Not necessarily answer, but at least explore and get students thinking about. For these courses, what would you say your big question is?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Each course is trying to answer a big question. And these 3 courses actually are also interconnected in different aspects of what that big question is. The first course, right, really around AI and innovation product management. The question is, how can you leverage AI to really bring business value to your enterprise? And your enterprise can be a large corporate where you work, and it could be your own company. But with AI coming, how do you really leverage that? And the crux here is it's very much a business issue. It's not a technology issue. This is why this is a business school course. So all the most difficult things, and I think leadership in the 21st century is going to be a lot, how do you leverage AI? So that's the first course, is AI. And in order to do that well, that's why you need some innovation thinking. And actually, I come from a product background, some product thinking. Those 3 in combination. So on the surface, that doesn't seem related, but that's why those are connected. So that's the first course addressing that question. The second course is broader. It's digital transformation. So it's kind of addressing the broader question in a world that's rapidly changing. How do you future-proof your organization? And of course, AI is one of those, but it's taking that broader lens. And, if you take a look at the history of what's happening, it does appear that the life cycles of organizations and business are getting shorter and shorter. In the past, you can graduate from school and do the same business in the same company for your whole career and retire. This is no longer true. And some studies will tell you that the lifetime of a business is like 10 years now. And so whether it's an individual, whether it's an organization, you need to keep reinventing yourself and finding what we call that second curve. So this is kind of what that's about. How do you future-proof your business? The third one is around entrepreneurship. I think that's the most fundamental piece. How do you realize these 2 things? And it's about, and this course is particularly about using the most important tool this decade and for the next decades, AI. So kind of as an entrepreneur, how do you employ this in a way that you now 10x your impact? And you 10x your impact wherever you are, whether in a big company, yourself, even personal life. And so actually what's really behind entrepreneurship, the deeper question here is really how do you take control of your destiny in a changing world? I mean, whenever there's change, there's so much discomfort. And, when things shift, even people that are bringing the shift in, it's a bit scary for them as well. And so a little bit what I've experienced is that entrepreneur mindset. I think that gives you that confidence to not need to know that straight path you need to know, but you're able to pivot and learn as you go. I think that's really the core of it. How do you really take control and build that confidence that wherever things happen, you're going to be at a prime spot to continue learning and pivoting to kind of take control. So those are the questions for those 3 courses.
The last one in the personal kind of approach, I feel like for our students as they graduate and prepare for their career, being able to adapt and succeed in kind of this new world where you're talking about digital workers, right? And how do we prepare students for that? And I think a big part of it is about using AI to amplify their own productivity, their own capabilities, but also, like you're saying, having the confidence to navigate.
Yeah, I think I think 2 skills in particular extremely important in this new phase. And I think number 1 is your risk appetite. When I was planning my career earlier, right, like the dots before it happened, I thought I need to choose the right path, the most safe path to give me the best outcome. Yeah. So from that perspective, let's not go too far off the path. Let's not take a risk. And then in my career after that, I went through waves and waves of layoffs, of me having to lay people off. And sometimes the companies are doing very well, actually, right? What that taught me is that sometimes you think the safe harbor you're in is safe. I think that doesn't exist. So I think, in my opinion, the biggest risk you can take is not taking a risk. And so from that perspective, you broaden what you think are the dots you might touch.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be more and more important when things shift so quickly, right? You can't, in other words, you can't stay on the same path and expect that path to go for the next 30, 40, 50 years, whatever that is. I mean, it's going to be shifting quickly. So you need to be able to take what appears risky so that you're kind of in different paths. So I think kind of that's going to be a skill that's more and more important. The second skill is an age-old skill of learning, lifelong learning. And I learned that when I was in high school and college too, and I never took that to heart. But I review back on my career, all the things I've done, I've learned on the job because the world is changing. I mean, so all the new things that are coming, yes, last year was generative AI, try learning that. Well, this year is agentic. You need to learn that now. Oh, next year is embodied AI. It's just continuous learning. And I think learning itself is a skill. It is a skill that I think many of us, myself included, having been many years in industry, you actually start losing that skill. You start losing that skill after, if I look back, you start losing that skill after you graduate from college. Yeah. And you're in the workforce where the pressure on you is to deliver every day, not to learn new stuff, But I think the ability to learn is more and more important. And of course, as I mentioned a bit earlier, organizations and leaders are starting to realize how important learning is in the age of AI, to foster a learning culture, truly a learning culture in the organizations. I think that's coming to the fore now. And then also really believing the culture of risk-taking and learning with organizations. And I think in this next wave that's coming, I mean, all of these skills, these soft skills, if you will, the skills that it's very hard sometimes to get in working life, it's important to learn how to learn.
And on the taking risks and learning, one of the themes I kind of see there, it's around being willing to challenge the status quo, not accepting the conventional wisdom, but actually coming up with new ways of looking at things. And that's something which I think is going to be more and more important as well.
I think you hit it exactly right. I think underneath those two, this ability to question assumptions, this first principle thinking, the type of thinking sometimes, unfortunately, that in corporations is not encouraged, is now coming to the fore. Because this is the type of thinking that will then allow you to think differently. Now, more and more, whether it's large organizations, even startups, right? I mean, it's that 0 to 1 thinking, and it comes back to what you said, Steve, which is that questioning assumptions. If you look around us, all the big new developments come from that. It's no longer enough to stay in the same lane, whether it's a career lane or your lane of thinking.
And that's one of the things that we try to do in our MBA program, where it's coming at things from multiple angles. We talked a bit about connecting the dots, right? Trying to give students that ability to learn from a lot of different people, a lot of different subjects, and use that to be able to question assumptions. So as I think about, how are we preparing people for the future, that's a big part of it.
That really resonates, because I think back to when I went to business school many, many years ago. And when I first went into the environment, it's all the dots I would never see. People, really sharp people in different industries, doing different things, thinking completely different. And it gave me the opportunity in the whole new environment to really think differently. It really shocked me. It broadened my view. If I were to look back in terms of what I gained the most from my business school education, I think that would be it. And now looking after that, after having graduated so many years, I think it's that has helped me to then kind of connect the dots across my career now. And even now, it's helping me as I'm thinking about kind of a further phase in my career going forward, kind of connecting those different dots, and those dots don't seem to connect. Right? These large traditional organizations, and then doing startups. But there's lots of connections once you give it the chance, and you give yourself a chance to think more deeply and try some different things to then put you in a place where your path and your abilities are very, very different than anybody else around you.
And, we're fortunate to have you giving back, taking a lot of your time to teach our students. What do you like about teaching? What keeps you engaged in this?
I must say I really do like it. And maybe in the most simple way, if I say what I like about it, I like that it's so pure. Pure in the sense that I can say it like it is. And being in work environment, for so many, many years, whenever you engage people, even when I give a speech, when I talk to media, even when I'm in a closed door environment, I'm very guarded and what I can say, because really. And I'll give you an example. I was just giving a keynote and executive sessions at a regional leading telco, and I told them, this is really interesting, and I want to post this to my personal LinkedIn, personal. Okay, here's what I want to say. You know what happened? It went through the corporate affairs and corporate communications, and they went through my whole draft and they rewrote it, and they took my pictures and they put so it was all cleared, and so it was still right. It's still okay, but lots of the very interesting things were not included in there, right? And I want to map it back to this. So what I like to share in classes are actually failure cases. It's the stuff that executives don't like to talk about because it doesn't reflect great on the organization and yourself. But I think in my career, I think the most important learning is all failures.
Yeah.
And really, and you've heard this many times before, failure is where you learn. So what I really like about teaching, because it's so pure, I'm just teaching students. I'm really trying to help them. And so I can tell it like it is. And it's a closed, safe environment. I can say it. It's not going, right, I mean, it doesn't go back to companies I worked with before. And so I think it's a very safe environment to really think differently, to learn, for me to share all these things. And I think the students do appreciate it because of the type of stuff you normally don't hear. And it's in closed doors, and it's in a learning environment. And I think kind of that's a bit what I think is kind of provided in terms of giving an additional perspective in terms of how theory works in real life and how you combine those two, right? Really, because in the business world, you have no theory. And you're just kind of doing things. You have no way to really put the dots together, to be honest. Yeah. And then like sometimes the dots, when you put it in theory, actually is a bit different. And so it's kind of that balance between two, which is what I really do like about, I think, the curriculum here in the business school here.
And to your point about lifelong learning and learning from failure, I think we all need safe spaces where we can learn from that and learn from other people's failures, but also just analyzing those and taking a real hard look at it.
And something else, I think there's something I really like about what UST is doing in terms of lifelong learning. Because in my classes, I have alumni.
Oh, yeah.
I have folks who have graduated, and they sit in on the class. And number one, I think when I see that, I'm so encouraged, because these are people who don't have to show up. Yeah. They got their degree, but they know they want to learn, and they spend their time to come in. And so I always welcome them. And it's just such a great service for the school to offer. For people who have already graduated, who want to learn new things. And oftentimes they contribute to, lots of these alumni are the most active contributors in class because they're sharing what's happening. And they're taking a bit of that learning and helping others in their class to kind of see things from a new perspective.
All right, well, I want to wrap up on just a more personal note. We've both overlapped and lived in different times in Beijing. I think you were there a little bit earlier than me, but maybe we overlapped for a couple of years, in Shanghai and also Hong Kong. Curious your views on a perennial debate about these cities. What do you like best about Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong?
It's always so hard to pick sides because each city think like they're the best, and each place has its good and bad. If I were to pick things, maybe I'll pick an analogy about what I like about the different cities. So maybe I'll start with Beijing first, right? Yeah. So Beijing is like Mao Tai, and I had Mao Tai from the first time. We had a business trip to Beijing, and I tell you, for those of you who haven't had it, it's quite jarring when you have it because it's very sharp and strong. It just shakes you, right? And I think it's not for everybody. And you have to learn to appreciate it a bit. And then a little bit, like when you appreciate it, you find it's very fine. I mean, so I must say that right? So I think Beijing is a bit like a Mao Tai. Yeah, it is such an interesting city, right? It's a city with such range because it's like the capital of China, so the capital there. You have like lots of the sites. That Forbidden City is there. The Summer Palace is there. So you got lots of that cultural aspect of it. It's got like, the taxi drivers there talk politics. So it's like they talk politics. So you're right. And then, like when I go to Beijing, I mean, there's so much technology there, right? And last time I went to their robotics soccer match, right, where you have autonomous robots kicking. So I think kind of like Beijing, I just love that range that it has. It's like a Mao Tai, right? And beginning a bit shocking. And I must admit, when I first moved to Beijing, I didn't like it that much personally. But over time, it's just amazing. And then like Shanghai, and I spent 6 years in Shanghai. Like Beijing was 8 years, and Shanghai was 6. I think Shanghai is a bit like champagne. It's like sparkling. It's beautiful. It's so sophisticated. It's so animated. And you go there, and it's really like sparkling. It's so international. It's so fashionable. I mean, you walk around, like the former French concession. You walk down. It's like fashion, sophistication, and that's what I love about it. And I always like the mix of life and technology. I think like retail there is next level with technology. So you go, like, for example, I think the largest Starbucks, I think in Asia, is still in Shanghai. And what's interesting, it's a joint project between Alibaba and Starbucks. And so you go there, you see this combination of, you can use your app and you can do all sorts of things, this online to offline, right? And so I think if you go across Shanghai, it's quite amazing. Then Hong Kong, I've been here years and years. I would say Hong Kong is like a cocktail. You mix of all sorts of different like influences into and if you find the right cocktail master, it's just next level. And you have I like to go. I mean, you have these places where they combine like Chinese ingredients. So like Taipei into your, right, and Shaoxing. I mean, they really, I mean, so Hong Kong really, and it still is this combination of East and West is what I love about it. I mean, I think that's also why I think UST is quite central. It's right at the center of East and West, those influences, in a way that, like, even like Beijing can't be. I mean, they're very international, but it's still right. So I think I think that's kind of what I love about that. And I think to people who come to Hong Kong, sometimes it might feel sometimes impersonal a little bit sometimes, right? You come here and it's a big city. I mean, it's like big cities are like that. And it's a bit impersonal. So this like inside or outside thing, right? A little bit like when you're kind of going around looking for the best cocktail, you find the speakeasies. And so you have to be like the insider to know, and I love that. And so a little bit like Hong Kong, I think Hong Kong like when you first get here and you're still a bit of an outsider and you're kind of getting in, and people might feel impersonal. But once you find the insiders, I think Hong Kongers are they're so accepting. And so I think kind of each place is so different. Yeah. I love all three cities.
They're all great cities, and I love it. Hong Kong as a cocktail. All right. Well, thanks, Dan, for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
I hope this episode has been enjoyable and given you some new trains of thought to explore. If I could sit down with you after this podcast, I would ask you the following questions. If you look back on your career, how have the dots in your life connected? Are you taking enough risks? On artificial intelligence, how is your company responding? Are you ready for the next wave of AI after LLMs? And, of course, what do you like best about Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong? Thanks for listening. To be the first to know about our next episode, please follow this podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple. To learn more about 𝐏𝐺𝐢𝐿, check out 𝐏𝐺𝐢𝐿 MBA on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, WeChat, and RedNote.